You're stockpiling ammunition. You've got a year's worth of freeze-dried meals. Your bug-out bag weighs 40 pounds, and you can name every item in it. But let me ask you something. What's your plan for taking a shit when the toilets stop flushing? I'm serious. When was the last time you went 72 hours without a shower, without brushing your teeth, without washing your hands after you handle raw meat or use the bathroom? You haven't, because you live in a civilization with running water and sewage systems. But here's what I know with absolute certainty. When those systems fail, and they will fail, 99% of preppers are going to die from something they could have prevented with a bar of soap and some basic knowledge. Not starvation, not dehydration, not gunfights over the last can of beans. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid, sepsis from infected cuts, tooth abscesses that spread to your brain. The same diseases that killed millions of people throughout human history before we figured out that maybe, just maybe, we should stop shitting where we eat. Today I'm showing you something that every survival expert knows, but nobody wants to talk about because it's not sexy. It doesn't involve tactical gear or firearms. It's the science of staying clean when the infrastructure collapses, and how that knowledge is worth more than every gun in your safe. Forget the zombie movies where everyone's covered in dirt and blood for months. Forget the tough guy fantasy that hygiene is optional. In a real collapse scenario, the people who understand sanitation survive. Everyone else becomes a statistic. If you want to be part of the 1% who makes it past the first 90 days, hit subscribe. Drop a comment with your current hygiene backup plan. Let's get tactical. Here's the truth they don't teach you in those overpriced survival courses. Food and water get all the attention. Preppers obsess over calorie counts and filtration systems. But hygiene is the silent killer that nobody sees coming until it's too late. Let me paint you a picture of what actually happens when sanitation fails. It's day 7 after the grid goes down. You've been rationing your water, which means you're not washing, you're not doing laundry. You're definitely not wasting precious drinking water on something as trivial as cleaning your hands. You prepare a meal with those hands. Maybe you're handling stored rice, or you're processing a squirrel you trapped. Your hands touch your mouth. That microscopic fecal matter you didn't wash off after your last bathroom trip just entered your digestive system. 48 hours later, you've got diarrhea. In a normal world, that's an inconvenience. In a collapse scenario, it's a death sentence in slow motion. Because now, you're losing fluids faster than you can replace them. Your careful water ration just became meaningless. You need 3 times as much water just to stay alive, but you're too weak to go get it. Your body temperature is spiking, you're getting delirious. Meanwhile, everyone in your group is using the same contaminated area for waste. They're drinking from the same water source you contaminated when you were too sick to walk to the designated latrine. Congratulations, you just killed your entire survival group with your own shit. This isn't theoretical, this is exactly what happened in every major disaster throughout history before modern sanitation. Refugee camps, siege scenarios, natural disasters. The mortality rate from waterborne disease exceeds the mortality rate from the actual crisis event. Run the numbers. Cholera kills you in hours through dehydration. Typhoid fever takes weeks, but has a 20% fatality rate without antibiotics, which you don't have. Dysentery causes you to literally shit out your intestinal lining. Hepatitis A shuts down your liver. E. coli, Giardia, Cryptosporidium, all of them are sitting in human feces, waiting for someone stupid enough to ignore basic hygiene protocols. And here's the kicker. Every single one of these killers is preventable. Not with advanced medical technology, not with expensive equipment, with soap and water applied correctly. But it gets exponentially worse, because hygiene isn't just about preventing waterborne disease. Let me teach you something they don't cover in those fantasy survival shows. Your skin is an organ. It's your first line of defense against infection. When you stop cleaning it, you compromise that defense. You get a small cut, could be from anything, processing firewood, climbing a fence, a cooking accident. In normal times, you wash it, maybe put on a band-aid, you forget about it. In a collapse scenario without proper hygiene, that cut becomes an entry point. Bacteria from your own skin, bacteria from the environment, bacteria from the dirt you haven't washed off in 2 weeks, they colonize that wound. 72 hours later, you've got a red streak running up your arm. That's lymphangitis. Blood poisoning. Your lymph nodes are swelling. You've got a fever. Without antibiotics, you're looking at sepsis, which has a 30 to 50% mortality rate, even with modern medical intervention, which you don't have, because the hospitals are either closed, overrun, or you can't get to them. all from a cut you could have prevented with basic wound cleaning and maintenance. I'm not talking about surgical sterility. I'm talking about washing a wound with clean water and soap, keeping it covered, changing the dressing daily. Simple practices that require you to maintain a hygiene system when everything else has failed. Now let's talk about your mouth. You think dental hygiene is optional? Here's the physics of what happens when you stop brushing your teeth. Bacteria in your mouth form plaque. Plaque hardens into tartar. Tartar inflames your gums. Your gums recede, exposing the roots of your teeth. But that's not the part that kills you. The bacteria from your gum disease enters your bloodstream every time those inflamed gums bleed. That bacteria can colonize your heart valves, causing endocarditis. It can form abscesses in your brain. It can trigger sepsis. And before all that happens, you might just get a tooth abscess that swells up and closes your airway, suffocating you over the course of several hours. This actually happened to people throughout history. A preventable tooth infection becomes a death sentence. All because someone thought toothpaste and a toothbrush weren't worth the space in their bug-out bag. Here's your first tactical directive. Water for hygiene is not optional. It's not a luxury you sacrifice to extend your drinking water. It's a critical resource that requires its own dedicated supply and sourcing strategy. The minimum water requirement for basic hygiene is 2 gallons per person per day, separate from your drinking water. That's for washing hands, basic body cleaning, wound care, and minimal laundry. Not for showers, not for comfort. For survival-level disease prevention. If you're not planning for that volume, you're planning to get sick. Now here's where it gets interesting. You can't use precious drinking water for hygiene, which means you need to source water that's safe enough for external use, but not necessarily potable. Rainwater collection is your first force multiplier. A simple barrel system on your downspouts gives you non-potable water for washing. You're not drinking this, you're using it to keep yourself clean enough that you don't die from preventable infection. Gray water recycling is your second multiplier. Water you use to wash your hands can be used to flush a toilet if you've rigged a manual system. Water from washing dishes can water plants or be used for initial rinse cycles. We're thinking in cascade uses. Water serves multiple purposes before it becomes waste. And here's the science behind water treatment for hygiene use. You need to remove particulates and kill pathogens. For hygiene water, not drinking water, you can get away with simpler treatment. Strain it through cloth to remove visible debris. Let it settle in a container for 24 hours so sediment drops to the bottom. Draw from the top. For pathogen control in hygiene water, solar disinfection works if you're patient. Clear plastic bottles filled with water, left in direct sunlight for 6 to 8 hours. UV radiation kills most pathogens. It's not perfect, but for washing your hands and body, it's adequate. For wound cleaning, you want boiled water that's been cooled, or water treated with a small amount of bleach. 8 drops of unscented household bleach per gallon of water. Let it sit for 30 minutes. But here's what most people get wrong. They think hygiene is about getting clean. It's not. It's about removing pathogens and preventing disease transmission. You don't need to smell good. You don't need to be comfortable. You need to interrupt the fecal-oral route. You need to prevent wound infections. You need to stop disease vectors. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of staying clean without running water or modern facilities. Let's start with your body. The most critical areas are your hands, your face, and your genitals. Everything else is secondary. A washcloth, a basin, and a quart of water is enough for a complete essential body cleaning. Wet the cloth, soap it up. Wash your hands first, then your face, then your underarms, then your groin, then your feet. Use the cleanest water at the start when you're washing the areas that touch your food. Use the same water progressively for less critical areas. Wring out the cloth, rinse it in clean water if you have it, or shake it out and let it dry for reuse. This is how soldiers in the field maintain hygiene. This is how people survived before plumbing. A quart of water and a cloth. Done correctly, it prevents the infections that kill you. Done incorrectly, or not at all, you're rolling the dice with cholera. Soap is your non-negotiable supply item. Not fancy soap, not artisanal soap, basic no-frills bar soap. Lye-based soap works. Commercial bar soap works. Liquid soap works, but it's harder to ration and store. A single bar of soap, used correctly, lasts one person approximately 3 weeks. Here's the chemistry that matters. Soap molecules have one end that attracts water and one end that attracts oils and fats. When you wash with soap, you're mechanically removing the oils from your skin that trap bacteria. You're breaking down the cell walls of bacteria. You're creating an environment where pathogens can't survive. It's not about killing everything, it's about reducing the bacterial load to levels your immune system can handle. And here's your multiplication factor. 1 5-gallon bucket, a cloth, and basic soap can serve as a complete hygiene station for a family of 4. You're not showering, You're maintaining the minimum cleanliness threshold to prevent disease. Now, let's talk about the thing everyone avoids until it becomes an emergency. Human waste disposal. When the toilets stop flushing, you have approximately 24 hours before you've got a sanitation crisis. Most people don't think about this until they're already in trouble. Here's the tactical reality. Human feces contains billions of pathogens: E. coli, salmonella, parasites, viruses. If you don't isolate it from your water source, your food prep area, and your living space, you contaminate everything. One person producing approximately 1 pound of feces per day. Multiply that by your group size. Multiply that by weeks or months. The simplest solution is a cathode latrine. 6 to 8 inches deep, at least 200 feet from any water source, downhill from your camp if possible. You do your business, you cover it with dirt, the soil microbes break down the waste over time. But here's what most people don't know. You can't use the same cat hole repeatedly. You dig a new one each time. If you're stationary, you need a better system. A deep trench latrine, 2 to 3 feet wide, 4 to 5 feet deep, as long as you need based on expected use time. You use sections of the trench progressively. After each use, cover with a layer of dirt. When a section is full, mark it and move to the next section. The depth keeps the smell down and prevents animals from digging it up. The covering prevents flies from accessing the waste and spreading disease. Position matters more than you think. Downwind from your camp. Downhill from your water source. Not visible from your living area if you can avoid it. Because the psychological component of sanitation affects morale, which affects survival. But far enough away that contamination is impossible. Here's the science of composting human waste, which is your long-term solution if you're staying in one location. Human feces, mixed with carbon-rich material like sawdust or leaves, and given time and proper conditions, breaks down into safe compost. But there are rules. The temperature needs to reach 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit to kill pathogens. The pile needs to age for at least a year before the compost is safe to use. A 5-gallon bucket with a tight lid, lined with a plastic bag, filled with sawdust or peat moss, becomes a functional composting toilet. You add a layer of carbon material after each use. When the bucket is full, you seal the bag, set it aside to age. It's not pleasant, but it works, and it prevents disease transmission. For urine, the rules are different. Urine is sterile when it leaves your body, unless you have a urinary tract infection. You can separate urine from feces, which makes both easier to manage. Urine can be diluted 1 to 10 with water and used as fertilizer. But here's the dark truth about waste management. Eventually, if you're in a group situation, you have to enforce discipline. Someone will get lazy. Someone will decide the latrine is too far away, and they'll just go behind a tree closer to camp. And that person will kill everyone through contamination if you don't shut it down immediately. This is where survival stops being about skills and becomes about leadership and enforcement. You either maintain sanitation discipline or everyone dies. There's no middle ground. Dental hygiene in a collapse scenario requires rethinking what's actually necessary. You don't need minty fresh breath. You need to mechanically remove plaque and food debris. A toothbrush without toothpaste still works. Baking soda mixed with a small amount of water makes functional toothpaste. Salt water works as a rinse. The key is mechanical action. You're brushing at a 45-degree angle to your gum line, removing the bacterial film before it hardens into tartar. 2 minutes, twice a day if you have the water. Once a day minimum if water is scarce. The investment is 1 cup of water and 2 minutes of time. The payoff is not dying from a tooth abscess. Flossing matters more than you think. Food trapped between your teeth decays and creates ideal conditions for bacterial growth. Actual dental floss is ideal. In its absence, thin cordage works, thread works. You're mechanically removing debris that brushing can't reach. And here's your force multiplier for dental care. Chewing fibrous foods like raw vegetables naturally cleans teeth. Chewing stimulates saliva production, which neutralizes acids and provides natural antibacterial action. It's not a replacement for brushing, but it's a supplement that requires zero resources. Laundry is where most preppers fail completely. They pack tactical gear and freeze-dried food, but they don't think about what happens when their clothes get contaminated with body oils, sweat, and environmental bacteria. Clothing that stays dirty becomes a disease vector. It holds moisture against your skin, creating ideal conditions for fungal infections. It chafes and causes open sores. It smells, which affects morale and attracts attention you don't want. The minimum viable laundry system is a 5-gallon bucket, water, and soap. Fill the bucket halfway with water, Add soap, add clothes. Agitate by hand for 5 to 10 minutes. Let sit for 30 minutes. Wring out clothes, rinse in clean water if you have it. If water is too scarce for rinsing, accept that some soap residue remains. It's still better than wearing contaminated clothes. You're prioritizing underwear and socks. These items contact your skin most directly and accumulate the most bacteria. Everything else can go longer between washing. One complete set of underwear and socks per person, washed every 3 to 5 days minimum. Drying matters. Wet clothes grow mold and bacteria. You need airflow and preferably sunlight. UV light kills pathogens. Proper drying prevents fungal growth that causes skin infections. Here's the tactical truth about clothing in a collapse scenario. You need 3 sets. One you're wearing, one that's clean and ready, one that's dirty and waiting to be washed. You rotate through them. This requires planning and pack space that most people don't allocate because they're too busy packing ammunition that they'll probably never use. And here's the science of fabric choice that affects survival. Natural fibers like cotton and wool have antibacterial properties that synthetics don't. Wool naturally resists odor and bacterial growth. It stays warm when wet. Cotton breathes and dries faster than you think. Synthetic tactical gear looks cool, but it doesn't provide the same benefits. Planning for laundry and dental care isn't glamorous, but it's what keeps you alive. But it holds odor and bacteria. The psychological component of hygiene is something nobody talks about until it's destroying group cohesion. Humans are wired to respond to cleanliness. When you stop maintaining hygiene, morale drops, depression increases, hopelessness sets in. The decision to stay clean is a decision to maintain your humanity and your will to survive. I've seen groups fall apart not from lack of food or security threats, but from the slow psychological deterioration that comes from living in filth. People stop caring. They stop maintaining discipline. They stop preparing for tomorrow because they can't see past the misery of today. Maintaining hygiene is maintaining hope. It's a signal to yourself and your group that you're still civilized, still planning to make it through this. Here's your tactical directive for medical hygiene beyond basic wound care. Any medical procedure, no matter how minor, requires clean hands and clean tools. You're washing your hands before and after any medical contact. You're cleaning instruments with boiled water or alcohol if you have it. Bandages and dressings get changed daily. You're inspecting wounds for signs of infection. Redness, spreading beyond the wound site. Red streaking up the limb. Increased swelling. Warmth. Pus. These are kill signals that require immediate aggressive treatment if you have antibiotics, or evacuation if you don't. And here's the reality nobody wants to hear. Without proper hygiene protocols, even minor medical situations become life-threatening. A burn that gets contaminated. A laceration that's sutured without proper cleaning. A dental extraction without sterilization. All of these become systemic infections that kill you in days. Now let's talk about the mistakes that kill people who think they understand hygiene. Mistake number 1. Sharing water containers and utensils without proper cleaning between users. Oral bacteria and viruses transfer through shared drinking vessels. If one person in your group gets sick, everyone gets sick, unless you maintain separation and cleaning protocols. Mistake number 2. Using the same cutting board for raw meat and vegetables without sanitizing between uses. Cross-contamination kills. You're either using separate boards, or you're washing with soap and hot water between uses, or you're accepting that everyone's getting food poisoning. Mistake number 3. Thinking hand sanitizer replaces hand washing. It doesn't. Hand sanitizer kills bacteria, but doesn't remove physical contamination. If your hands are visibly dirty, sanitizer just creates a thin film of alcohol over the dirt. You need soap and water for mechanical removal of pathogens. Mistake number 4. Not protecting water sources from contamination. Your latrine needs to be far from your water. Your garbage needs to be far from your water. Your laundry area needs to be downstream from your water collection point. This is basic hydrology that people ignore until the cholera starts. Mistake number 5. Assuming that if you can't see dirt, you're clean. Pathogens are invisible. You can look clean and be covered in disease vectors. Hygiene is about process and discipline, not appearance. And here's the final dark truth about hygiene in a survival scenario. You can do everything right and still get sick. You can maintain perfect sanitation protocols and still encounter a pathogen that your immune system can't handle. You can keep yourself clean and watch someone in your group die from an infection anyway. But the question isn't about guarantees. The person who maintains hygiene discipline has exponentially better odds than the person who doesn't. The difference between a 5% chance of dying from infection and a 50% chance of dying from infection is hygiene. The difference between a group that survives 3 months and a group that survives 3 years is sanitation discipline. This doesn't make you invincible. Nothing makes you invincible. But it makes you more likely to be alive when help arrives, when you reach your destination, when you establish long-term sustainability. It means you die from bad luck or overwhelming force, not from preventable disease caused by your own ignorance or laziness. Here's your immediate action plan. Open a new tab right now and order the following items: 10 bars of plain soap, 5 washcloths, 2 5-gallon buckets with lids, 1 entrenching tool, 50 feet of paracord for clotheslines, 1 bottle of unscented household bleach, basic toothbrushes, and baking soda. These items cost less than $100. Map your property or your bug-out location right now. Where's your water source? Where would you position a latrine to maintain 200 feet minimum distance? Where would you hang clotheslines with good sun exposure and airflow? Where would you establish your hygiene station? If you're in an urban environment, identify backup water sources now: rain collection points, park ponds, swimming pools in your neighborhood. These become hygiene water sources when the taps go dry. Practice your hygiene protocols before you need them. Set a timer for 2 weeks. See if you can maintain basic cleanliness using only 2 gallons of water per day. No showers, no running water. Just a basin, a cloth, and discipline. You'll learn what works and what doesn't when the stakes are zero. Build or buy a composting toilet system and actually use it for a month. Get comfortable with the reality of waste management before you're in a crisis situation where failure means death. Stock medical supplies specifically for hygiene-related issues: antifungal cream for skin infections, antibacterial ointment for wounds, oral rehydration salts for diarrhea. These items are force multipliers that address the consequences of imperfect hygiene when you're doing your best, but the situation is overwhelming. And here's your final decision point. You can keep preparing like everyone else, focused on food and guns and tactical gear, assuming hygiene will somehow take care of itself. 99% of preppers make that choice. They stockpile ammunition they'll never fire while ignoring the soap that would actually save their life. Or you can accept that survival is about the unglamorous fundamentals: staying clean, managing waste, preventing disease. The boring, uncomfortable, essential practices that separate survivors from casualties. 1% of preppers think about hygiene. Maybe 1/10 of 1% actually implement functioning sanitation systems before they need them.